there seems to be universal agreement at this point that this is a brand new presidential race, at least one that is significantly different than it was just 8 or 9 days ago. But how different is it? What's actually changed? It's important to have a little humility here. I guess you could say there's a lot we don't know. But here's what we do. Let's take a look at the map. What I'm showing you right now is the map from 2020, where President Biden was able to win in order to get more than 270 electoral votes. And you see kind of the critical battleground states here, the blue wall of Pennsylvania, of Michigan, of Wisconsin, the Sun Belt states where he was able to flip Georgia, flip the state of Arizona, hold on to states like Nevada. Obviously, that was critical to his victory and really undoing a lot of what Trump was able to do in his victory in 2016. Now let's look at where the race was before President Biden decided not to run for re-election. Now, based on where CNN projections of race ratings stood, Donald Trump was already over 270 electoral votes. That's how bad things were, at least in that moment, for the Biden campaign. Now, it doesn't mean that's where things were going to end up, but it's where the race was in that moment in time. You saw states like Georgia basically out of play at that point. Arizona still very much a swing state, democratically held over a series of elections. State of Nevada was leaning red. So too was the critical blue wall state of Michigan, also leaning red. In fact, when you talk to Biden campaign advisors, including in a public memo written by co-chairwoman Jen O'Malley Dillon, they acknowledge those Sun Belt states that President Biden was able to make headway in 2020, they were pretty much all but out of reach. They said they could still be in reach, but really their focus was right here, the blue wall. They needed to keep Michigan, they needed to keep Wisconsin, and they needed to keep the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So where do things actually stand right now? Well, if you think of where this was the map was 9 or 10 days ago, and you talk to Democrats who made very clear what they needed more than anything else was to hold on to the state of Pennsylvania, to Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, to hold on to the state of Michigan, to hold on to the state of Wisconsin, that is still clearly the most clear pathway forward for Democrats. The blue wall, as it's known, is still something that the Harris campaign, no longer the Biden campaign, even though it has a lot of the same people, is very much targeting. However, what they say is different, at least both publicly in memos, but also privately, is that what the Harris operation does is it opens up those pathways back down those Sun Belt states. In fact, they think North Carolina is very much a potential in-play state. Democrats have come very close a couple of times. Very, very population driven, much of that population coming from black voters. Georgia now potentially back in play as well, as President Biden did in 2020. Now they say it's a possibility. Nevada potentially back in play as well, particularly if Latino voters, which were sagging heavily in the Biden coalition, start to come back in a major way. What about the state of Arizona, also potentially back in play? Obviously, if you look at the numbers there, if all of those went Democratic, it would obviously portend a very large win for the vice president. Now, that is not expected to happen at this point in time, but the reality is, when you talk to Democrats, they say they now have multiple pathways. What do they mean by that? They mean it's not just about the blue wall. There's also Sun Belt options as well, options that they thought were off the table just 9, 10 days ago. Why do they think this? Well, it's interesting. When you look at the numbers that we pulled up from the CNN SSRS poll just a few days ago, we actually went back to voters and asked them, voters we'd already surveyed just a few months ago, and asked them where they stood at this point in time. And this is what the Harris campaign is keying on in this moment. The Biden coalition, young voters, black voters, suburban women voters, where are they now compared to where they were then? Well, in April, June, Biden in the 18 to 34 category, only 42%. Donald Trump actually had a lead. Now, Harris has flipped that, 47% to 43%. What about black voters, such a critical backbone of the Democratic coalition? Biden was at 70% to Trump's 23%. Now, Harris at 78% to 15%. What about women voters, particularly suburban women voters? Critical, again, particularly in some of those blue wall states, if Biden's strength with older voters starts to sag a little bit with Harris now on the ticket. Well, women voters, 50% to 45%. It was tied when Biden was still in the race. There are numbers that are showing the Democratic coalition is coming home. That opens additional pathways beyond just the blue wall. What does it mean, a victory for Vice President Harris? That very much an open question. Talk to Democrats, they say still an underdog. But if you look at the dark blue numbers compared to the lighter blue numbers, certainly Democrats feel like now, more than anything else, they at least have an opportunity.